Does anyone here who could potentially be watching this video right now absolutely hate how science is taught in school, but surprisingly may find an interest in how science is presented on things like the internet and all that wide space that exists on our phones and computers and general technology? You may know some massive sort of scientific YouTubers where, whilst science is not a particularly popular pop culture topic in a way, these science videos that other creators produce seem to get millions and billions of views because they are presented in such a way where people actually are interested in that topic and understand it. They may not necessarily understand it, they may just find what sort of happens and goes on in those videos an interesting thing, but some people may actually have gained an interest in that subject from that form of content rather than the way that school taught science inside of whatever curriculum they were in. Many people absolutely despise science because of the way that school taught it, the things that are associated with school, the rules, the teachers, the lack of learning, all that sort of stuff, talking with your friends, messing around. That culture that's associated with school really screws up an interest in science for some people, despite the fact that it is a really good way to fundamentally understand how the world works in all its variety of different ways. And many people just choose to ignore scientific education for the rest of their life after they go off and do other things that may not be related to science, which is fair enough, but it's because the way the school taught them science, they absolutely didn't like it. They were taught, you know how things like maths and technology, engineering and science, all of those are categorized as STEM subjects. Some people have these limiting beliefs that are often put in them by school, not even secondary schools, but things like primary schools and infant schools, maybe even nurseries at such an early age. They are just not academically capable enough. They're not able to memorize this sort of stuff as well as some other people. If you are perceived as academically dumb, you are not good at maths, you're not good at science, because you don't have the ability to remember the way to do things. For instance, maths. Math isn't necessarily about memorization. You just have to remember the way and the methods that you do things, that you work out, the variables, and then if you remember the way to do it, chances are, without making any silly mistakes, you can get to an answer. But many people, because the school system has put upon them these limiting beliefs that school, you're not good enough to actually remember, that don't have a good enough memory, and that is like a genetic sort of limitation that you have. You have a natural intelligence cap, which means that you are not academically smart enough to be able to study these subjects at a higher level. And while many people may say that this necessarily isn't true, there are many sort of ways in which this is inferred. People at school aren't directly told that they're just stupid and they're not good at memorizing ways to do things and certain things that happen inside of the scientific world. People aren't directly told that they're not good enough for that. Some people are, but the majority of people that I know, and in my sort of the way that I've observed and experienced the way that this happens, it's sort of an inferred thing. And many people just don't care about science because it's also seen as like a thing that you do if you're smart, if you're unique, if you're a nerd, because it's seen as something that's so prestigious in that academic sense, despite the fact that it is a fundamental thing that I personally think all people should have a basic understanding of. You don't have to be really, really interested in science. You don't have to know all the specific ins and outs of this, that, the other. But I do believe that there should be a basic level of understanding because it can help you interpret the world in a better way than what you would potentially be able to do without a basic level of scientific understanding. Knowing how things like the metabolic processes, especially the basic ones, things like how your food is metabolized and the way that works, the rates of how that happens inside of your bodies, can improve how you think and how you make decisions on a daily basis, especially to do with your fitness and your diet, which while many people aren't even interested in that, so that sort of directly correlates with their lack of interest in science. That can potentially happen, but obviously if you do want to be healthy, if you do want to live a better life potentially, fitness and having a clean diet at least 80% of the time will help you and benefit you in that way. And having that level of scientific understanding will be critical to you on that journey, because so you can sort of assess the right from the wrong, the bro science from the actual science, and yeah, just all that sort of stuff in general. The school system in general has many flaws, one of which is the fact that it tries to teach people the same thing in the exact same way, which, considering there are around 8 billion people on this planet, not everyone is going to learn in the exact same way. Not everyone likes the information overload. While some people will like that and appreciate that and be able to learn and memorize things that way, some people are visual learners, some people will need to listen to audiobooks and all that sort of stuff to actually be able to process certain information. School doesn't understand this, and so their classroom teaching is often based on the method of information overload, where you were given information and expected to memorize it in some way, shape, or form. Often, while sometimes you are given help on ways to memorize that through note-taking, etc., oftentimes schools don't actually assist with that. Some schools do, and props to them for actually assisting people on that, but the majority of schools just leave it to you to be able to figure out and blame and give you the personal responsibility without necessarily actually giving you the tools to be able to become and actually have that account, to be able to get the results that you want out of certain schools, subjects and grades that you may be currently doing. Another way that school just screws up the teaching of many subjects is the limiting belief that it infers in you by the way that things are graded, the way that you are sort of perceived as a human being if you just are academically dumb. Those who used to be, for instance, you probably would have heard, you've probably seen examples from this in your life. Those people who aren't necessarily academically smart, they weren't good in infant school, they didn't necessarily have the best reports in nursery, they weren't getting good grammar tests, and they weren't getting 10 out of 10s in their spelling tests in year 3 and like when they were sort of 8 years old. Those people often don't end up getting good grades when it comes to GCSEs and A-levels, because they've always had this limiting belief in their mind, which is hard to get rid of. It's hard for schools to not actually have this way of life and system. It's hard for them to actually do that, because there needs to be some level of progress tracking in all of the people that they teach, etc. So it's hard to get around that. But you will notice that all these people who don't get good grades when they're 8 years old don't get good grades when they're in their GCSEs and A-levels. There will be exceptions, 100%, but the chances are, if you were one of those academically gifted people when you were in infant school, you're also going to be quite academically gifted when you're in A-levels and GCSEs. And while that may not correlate to how you necessarily do in the real world, in how like the careers, the jobs, the entrepreneurship, etc., chances are if you're good academically in primary school, you're good academically when it comes to universities and A-levels. That just seems to me how it works. Some people can sort of fall off that train, and some people can really build themselves up. That does happen, of course, but if you looked at a general average trend, I figure that may end up being the case overall. And the way that this happens is it sort of gets progressively bigger as it goes up. Schools in secondary schools, at least in the UK, have the method of foundation and higher tiers, where if you're taking foundation, you're basically capped at getting a certain grade for GCSE level. If you look at the new grading system, 9 is the highest, 1 or a U is the lowest. If you take foundation subjects if you are doing foundation, which is often not your choice to do, for subjects like maths and science and languages as well, you are capped at getting a grade 5 instead of being able to possibly achieve a grade 9. That in itself, while not necessarily intentional, the cap just sets so many limiting beliefs on you that you subconsciously, or you consciously couldn't have even imagined, but subconsciously potentially do exist inside of your brain. And it is the school system, it is the way that the world works, the way that people act towards each other in any way of life, that means that people have these limiting beliefs upon them from such a young age. They don't do well in school, at primary school, chances are they're going to have such strong limiting beliefs that they're not going to do well in school at secondary school either. And that is a problem, because that means that if they're not doing well in the academic stuff in primary school, you only really start to get taught science at a proper level in secondary school, which is also a little bit of a problem in itself, but I probably won't talk about that in this video. Science is seen as a STEM subject. Science, technology, engineering and maths. It's seen as one of those big, academically hard to grasp subjects. And so if they're not doing well at maths at primary school, they go into science classes, they immediately have limiting beliefs swirling around their head. And so chances are they won't do well there either. And that just seems to me how it works. I genuinely do believe that if you give yourself a blank slate, or if you give children, if you are from a school perspective, a blank slate, there is potential for the order to be shuffled up and mixed up. People who aren't necessarily the best at memorizing things can get good grades because they can memorize things in a way that best suits them, that could be better than what the school system teaches them and what the school system thinks is the reason that they're bad at memorizing things, even though they could be good at memorizing things in a completely different way. But that's just my observation. I do think school screws up the teaching of science, despite the fact that it is an important subject, and being knowledgeable about its basics gives you a vital understanding of the way that humans work and the way that the world works, which is vital to make decisions and be able to calculate the good and the right, the objectively and factually correct from the wrong and the stuff that's not actually correct. But with that, that's about all I think I wanted to say for this video. If you really do want to educate yourself in science, I've done plenty of videos on that in the past, and there are so many other people that have also done that as well. But with that, I recommend subscribing because I like this community of young, troubled people who are willing to improve themselves, so much more than they already have, and good luck.